Hello everybody and welcome to this roundtable discussion. It's a great joy to be the current editor of the IJNA in its 50th year, and it's a joy also as well to be handing it over to Athena Trakadas, who you can see as well, who will be taking over as editor from the beginning of December. So I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves and explain their connection to the IJNA. Let's start with David, who has to unmute himself.
Yes, good morning. I was involved with the CNE from the very first year, 1964, and I work on harbour archaeology, particularly in the Mediterranean. But in the late 60s, one was very involved in fighting for legislation in Britain for protection of wrecks, particularly after 1967, and that became an important part of the background for the journal's early role, lobbying, and it was very important, and the role of Angela Croom, particularly there. But I was also involved in starting the lobby for international conventions, starting in the Council of Europe in the 70s. And finally, this became the UNESCO convention 30 years later, thanks to Lyndall Brott and Pat O'Keefe. So that was my involvement. And in the launch of the journal, I had the particular experience, which Valerie may well describe more, when Honor Foster was involved and Angela Croom was involved. We had an emergency meeting in Honor's house to make sure that the first journal, edition of the journal, got off on time. That was also when one discovered about the paintings in Honor's house. That's another story. But that was our involvement. We thought we needed a journal and we needed an organ where we could also be involved in the political side of archaeology, which was important in those early days. Thank you.
And now, David, what's your position now?
I've been on the publications committee for 50 years now, and as not an official advisory editor, but I've been involved throughout and contributed, and still I think we'll have one last big contribution to make to the journal. But I've been involved with the journal through the publications subcommittee for all these 50 years.
Great. Let's go to, I don't know if Valerie can hear us. We've got Valerie sort of coming in and out.
I think she's struggling to connect.
Maybe
Miranda,
not. So let's go to Paula next then.
Sorry about that. I was peripherally involved right from the beginning because I was in David Blackman's honours special subject class in 71 to 72, when we heard quite a lot about all these developments, frustrations and whatever. And somebody in our preliminary discussions raised the question of how the first edition was disseminated and what it cost, and nobody seemed to have an answer. But I can say that as a student, I did buy it. I even hard bound it because I went to bookbinding classes, and there it is with rather wonky lettering on the spine. So it was clearly available to students, though I don't remember how or why at the time. And then I became editor in whatever year it was. I did 10 years before
1989,
Miranda.
I think.
Right. And
oh no, 2003. Sorry, I missed a line.
And then took over as book reviews editor after Angela died. So I've been involved for a long time. Okay.
Indeed. Thank you. John?
Hi, so my name's John Cooper. I'm a senior lecturer in Arabic Studies and Islamic Material Culture at the Institute of Arab and Islamic Studies at the University of Exeter. In about 2004, I had a bit of a career change from business journalism to maritime archaeology. And at that moment in my life, I started the master's program at the University of Southampton. And Lucy Blue kind of said, oh, you'd be just the right kind of person to be involved in the publication subcommittee. So by the time I came along to PubSub in the mid-2000s, it was already a venerable organization with some very, very experienced people on it. And I can by no means claim to have any of the kind of amazing early history and founding roles of people like David and Paula. So I was involved in PubSub, I think from 2006 till 2019. And for quite a chunk of that time, I was chairing the committee as well. My background's in Arab and Islamic studies, as you can tell from the place I work. So I've always been particularly interested in that part of the world, in maybe ethnography more than kind of traditional archaeology. And that's the kind of perspective that that I've brought to my time on PubSub and my involvement with the journal.
I'm going to remind you that you're currently an advisory editor.
Oh, and I'm an advisory editor as well. Yes, yes. I certainly am, yes.
And leading us on to another advisory editor, Dolores.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I am Dolores Elkin, and I am a maritime archaeologist from Argentina. And I've been an advisory editor of the IJNA for quite a few years now. I think it's about 15 or so. Mm. And it's always been an honor to be part of the advisory editors board, because the IJNA is an iconic journal and it's known worldwide. And frankly, like being somehow representing Latin America in the journal is fantastic.
Great.
Thank you.
So I'm going to remind everyone that the IJNA is published now since this year by Taylor and Francis, and we're published for the Nautical Archaeology Society, so we form part of the Nautical Archaeology Society. And I wanted to ask David for his memories of how it all got started. Why was it thought necessary to have a nautical archaeology journal? Nautical archaeology and underwater exploration, I think, right at the beginning. And how did that actually come about? How was it put together?
Yes, well, I was hoping we'd also have Valerie's contribution here, because she was really involved from the start. But it was Joan Duplatt Taylor was secretary of the Council for Nautical Archaeology, and then the Nautical Archaeology Trust, and then it became the Nautical Archaeology Society. And there were two aspects. One was there was a gap for a journal precisely on nautical archaeology. We're still arguing about the best adjective to use, but Anna was quite influential here, and I think she suggested the first publisher, Seminar Press, and I've got a copy of the leaflet which went out with the first number. There was a lot of good advertising at the beginning, and we got some good recommendations, for example, an editorial in Antiquity and other journals. And people like Dean Daniels felt it was a very good idea to have a specific journal. We're not a separate subject, we're part of archaeology, but it was important that we had, and in the early days, before social media, it had a newsletter role, and we then had an NAS newsletter. But in the early days, and this was one of Angela Kroom's particular points, things like surveys of particular museums. She was a great traveller, and that and newsletters, what's going on, was important in the early days. This is something that's no longer the case. We have the weekly news from the NAS. but it was a voice a political voice in Britain at the time, a political voice in the world for wreck protection at international level, but also a service for members of the society to encourage members, and particularly the vocational side, which has always been important in the work of the NAS. I think this was the background, and which Joan and Honor and Angela, and very soon Valerie, who had a key role for many years. I'm sorry she's not with us. I think that answers your question.
Yes, perhaps we'll listen now to a recording that Valerie made for us a couple of days ago, fearing that she'd have technical problems as she is having today.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okie dokie. Hopefully this, just bear with me. Actually, I just need to make sure I share the sound. Just going to stop the share sound. Here we go.
Well, it was like many things in life, it was an accident. It was the result of the Graveney boat rescue excavation and my going down to Greenwich to help unpack and supervise what happened down there. And George Naish, who was chairman of the CNA, pounced on me and co-opted me onto this committee about which I knew nothing. But very soon I realized that it was a crisis and we had to campaign for protection of underwater sites. So I came in on that. And very senior to me was Joan Duplat-Taylor, who was, I think, 30 years older than me, who was the secretary of the society. And what I didn't know was that she and Honor Frost had already planned something like 5-10 years before that nautical archaeology needed to be a scientific discipline and that to be recognized, accepted by the land archaeological community, it had to have a properly refereed academic journal. So they already had those ideas in hand, and they also knew that archaeology had to be taken underwater. So they decided, with Peter Throckmorton's help, they pinpointed George Bass and got him to Cape Caledonia, and the rest is history. So they were the pioneers, and they very much operated independently of the CNA. I mean, we were a self-appointed loose committee. So in a way, all the members did their own thing. And when the journal was launched, it was, of course, under the aegis of CNA and published by Seminar Press, chosen by Honor Frost. And Joan was the natural first editor. And she's rightly the founding editor, because not only did she found the journal, but she was a key founder of the discipline of nautical archaeology. So there I was, a junior member, not knowing which way was up. And Honor and Joan left for the Mediterranean, leaving Angela with the responsibility for producing the first issue. Honor and Joan had commissioned another chum of theirs, Lucien Bache, who was a Hague, one of the International Tribunal judges, to write an article on nautical archaeology to take up the first volume. When that arrived, it wasn't long enough. And so there was a crisis. I think this was probably a crisis meeting that David attended. And Angela suddenly had to find copy. And there was no time to get copy from abroad. So she had the articles in hand from this country and still needed more. So she descended on me, and I was digging in Broadstairs at the time, and she turned up with the most ancient collapsible typewriter that should have been in a museum, with a command that I write articles to fill the journal. And Andrew Oddie was there, so he agreed to produce an article on the transport of the timbers. And I did one on the Graveney ship, which was not a problem, but she still wanted more. And I wrote a rather embarrassing, I have never even dared read it, something on thoughts on recording old ships to provide her with a bit of extra copy. So that was my introduction. And then Joan had decided that she'd obviously decided to groom me to take over as editor. She was nearing retirement. She knew that Angela, she was an award-winning science journalist, was just not suitable to be an editor, because Angela hadn't got the patience for academic niceties and refereeing. She just wanted to get things published as quickly as possible. And she never reformed. So in fact, all subsequent editors had to deal with Angela's quite wayward way of approaching things. I expect they will have incidents of this happening to tell us about.
There we go. That's her first.
Thank you. Yes, well, that does give us some insights into the first edition coming out. I'd heard David's story, but that does put another layer on it. Well, it came out and it was well accepted, I think. I'm interested in what we think now, because I know at the time there were discussions about whether archaeologists, underwater archaeologists, nautical archaeologists should be publishing in their own journal. Was it worth having our own journal, or should we be trying more to infiltrate the terrestrials journals that were already in place? I wonder what your thoughts are on that now. Paula, you're muted.
Colin and I have never quite decided whether a separate journal was a good or a bad thing. I think it was probably very good for the avocationals, who I think would not have published in other journals. But I'm still not sure whether it's a good thing in the long term. But what I made some notes when you sent that email, and I said, it's got to continue to be very relevant and of a high standard, or it's got to, disappear gracefully. I mean, we have actually published a few things from land archaeologists, with vaguely maritime interests, because of the high quality, particularly when we started having full color. And a lot of journals didn't, or had limit on number of illustrations. We've never had a limit on the number of illustrations. So that has made it attractive the other way around. But I'm still not sure.
John.
Thank you. Yeah, I think many people in many areas of academia will, more broadly, will recognize the dilemma of, should you speak inward towards your own community who know, a lot more about the discipline, and also as David pointed out, in the early days of maritime archaeology, establishing this as a respectable and venerable kind of discipline in its own right. Compared in contrast to reaching out to a wider and broader community of academics. And I think that's for many people who publish in the journal, I think that's or who publish generally, that's always a decision that's made. And I think the idea really maybe is to try to get a little bit of balance between the two. What I would say is that perhaps because of the way that people are consuming, if we can use that word, publications nowadays, can I say that they may be becoming a little bit more detached from the publication in which they came, in the sense that in the old days you went to a library or you picked it up off your doorstep and it was a bound journal, whereas now people are, there's open access, people are searching online and finding individual journals. So perhaps that kind of dilemma is being softened a little bit just by the availability in the media through which we can access these journals nowadays and these articles nowadays.
My feeling is that it has had an integral role to the development of the subject, and the fact that we've had a journal or two, because there's been others as well, has been a focus for our subject and allowed people to consider themselves maritime archaeologists when they've published within it. I still think there's an enormous amount of work to get people from outside our very small community to be reading us. But I think we now have the opportunity with the new ways that the journal is published to be able to bring them in without them necessarily having, you know, the full subscriptions to the journal. So I think it's encouraging, and I'm glad it's there. So I'm glad the choice was made 50 years ago to kick it off. I wanted to ask Paula, and I think we can have another clip from Valerie. Maybe we should go to the clip from Valerie about how the content has changed over the 50 years of the journal.
I can play the next clip from Valerie. Yes, I don't know about if it answers your question, but I'll certainly play the next clip.
Let's hear it and see.
Bear with.
Well, I was officially assistant editor for the next 2 issues, I think it was. And then I really had to say to Joan, I could not take it on. And she cast around for somebody, and James, who was already quite elderly, to do that, which he did. And then Ian obviously found it too much to do. So it lurched. I hope it never appeared to lurch, but it really did struggle.
And then you became the editor in full, in chief, shall we say, in 1989 through to 2002.
Yes.
Fond memories of those years or not?
Absolutely not. No, it stopped me doing all kinds of things I wanted to do, because it was a treadmill. You couldn't sort of schedule it that you do it in a particular month, or you deal with things, or you had a lovely cascade so that you knew when things were coming in. It was a constant worry, because not only were you waiting for copy, but you needed to balance the composition of each issue. And you'd have a critical article which was going to do just that, and it wouldn't turn up in time. I tell you, I'm making very heavy weather, but I'm sure the other editors also found it was not a straightforward job.
But yet you took it on.
It had to be done. I mean, like so many things, like campaigning for wreck protection, like the UNESCO Convention, these had to be done. And if we were there, we did what was needed.
There you go.
Well, I think both Paula and I will recognise some of the problems that she talked about.
What was your question before that?
My question before that was, can we see any changes in the content, in what's been contributed to the journal over the 50 years?
Definitely, yes. In general terms, it's got broader. There's geophysical developments. There's lots of ways in which it's broadened. There's a few ways in which it's narrowed. There was more stuff about river archaeology in the early days. But it, as I say, in general, there's more rather than less. There's probably less shipwreck excavation because it's just got so expensive. And most universities are shying away from it because of cost and insurance and health and safety and all these things. But there's still a lot of work to be done on the products of previous shipwreck excavations. So, I mean, I think it's probably reaching a wider audience than it was. I've always thought the book reviews served a purpose of ensuring that everyone who picked up their prepaid volume found something that was of interest to them. Because particularly in the days when it was 4 issues a year, there weren't that many articles in each issue. And we do cover an enormous range of time and place. I'm conscious that we're always trying to get more international things. It's very difficult to be English speaking and yet trying to be international, because it's always easier to deal with things in English. So I think that's something we've always got to work at, deserving the name international.
I've always thought the book review section is a very strong and necessary part of the journal. It's true that Angela ruled over it with an iron hand, and sometimes we had to tell her that she wasn't allowed to edit quite as hard as she would have done for a newspaper. But I still think it's really important, and I think it's really important for students. It's the one piece of advice that I give more or less anyone I can talk to, is that if you read the book reviews section, then you see what questions are being asked now, what's being published now, what a PhD question looks like once it's been published. I think it's a really brilliant resource, and I wish more people would, well, I think we are having lots of readers, but I wish even more people would read and contribute to it. I wanted to go back, as you can see, we can actually see Valerie, so that's great. But in her clip, she was telling us about the history of the changeover of editors. So I just wanted to say, so Joan de Platte-Taylor started in 1972, and Ian Morrison took over in 1981 and was replaced by James Kirkman quickly afterwards in 1982. Valerie took over in 1989, Paula in 2003. I picked up the tiller in 2012-13, and I'm about to hand it over to Athena. So that's the list of editors we've had. I think as well that although we haven't seen as many underwater wreck excavations, there's been, in recent years, we've seen a lot of dry land wreck excavations. If we count the Eni Capot and the some of the Marseille boats and so forth. I think the biggest difference is just the quantity of data that we're able to deal with now. I mean, I made the same point yesterday, actually, that the subject has just grown so much over the last 50 years that there's fewer unique sites. There's always comparanda, and the subject is just so much more mature. I wanted us to look at the impact that the digital edition has had or is having. So Paula, do you remember when we first went digital?
It was gradual, because I started off posting 2 copies of a text and a CD to somebody I'd never met in the Netherlands. And then I got to send stuff in a whole issue at a time by FTP to Blackwell's, and then gradually we started using email, and things could be sent in batches instead of whole issues. And now we have everything published when it's ready, and that now applies to book reviews as well as the main articles. So it's been very gradual, as has the adoption of hopefully more and more open access. Although that's complicated, and the way journals are now sold in batches to university libraries makes it very difficult for the avocationals and the independent researchers, as David is always complaining as well, because we don't all have that automatic access. So the digital revolution has been slow and steady, but I think it's good. It's much easier to find things. I can remember, having to go into a library and flick through the table of contents of every issue of a journal, which was physically tiring, quite apart from mentally tiring. It's wonderful to be able to find things. It's also, things are being published quicker again. When we went to 2 volumes instead of 4, it was, some things were taking an awfully long time to be processed and get to final publication. Something that just missed 1 issue was, 6 months later. Now, if things go online as soon as they're ready, it makes a big difference. It also means the editorial work is more shared out over time, rather than having this awful, approaching deadline every 6 months.
And what about our reach? David, do you want to say something?
Yes, to stress the word international in the title. We've always wanted to have an international view, and I've always thought it was important that we help, even if it means problems for the editors, to take text. For example, my particular interest in the Mediterranean and in harbours, there's a lot of work being done in Turkey, and the results are inaccessible if they only come out in Turkish. And we have regularly got reports on work in these countries, which involves quite a lot of editorial work, but it's right. Similarly, in the past, we always wanted to encourage avocational archaeologists who had important finds to produce publications that we could publish. And it's important that we're peer reviewed. We wouldn't get any, quote, scholars, professional archaeologists to publish if we didn't have if we were not a recognized and fairly highly graded journal. So that's important. That has made it perhaps more difficult for us to get our members, NAS members and others who are avocational archaeologists to publish. But that's an important challenge, as it is for us to keep our international reach, whether it's Southeast Asia, Eastern Mediterranean, or whatever. I'm sure, Miranda, you've been good, and I'm sure Athena will be good, as Paula was before, in getting the international part of our title remaining valid. Thank you.
Well, it's certainly an aspect that's helped by having a digital volume, because we know that readers will find it everywhere that they have access to internet, which obviously isn't still everyone in the world, but it's not so far off.
If I could add a point, the famous crisis meeting over volume 1, there was no mobile telephones. We couldn't get hold of Joan in southern Italy or Anna somewhere in the Mediterranean. This was a totally different world. We're now in a world where we have all the benefits, but also some of the disadvantages of social media. But it is practically much easier to do that side of the editorial work. Sorry, to add that point.
Athena, I want to.
Yes. Yeah, I was just going to add about the international reach as being an international reader when I started as well in the US when Valerie was still editor. It was the go-to journal when we were, again, it was only in paper copies, so you had to go through and read the table of contents, or somebody had some well-thumbed photocopies that they were able to share. But it really became, in where I was at the time at Texas A&M, it was very much, if you were able to get a article published in IJNA, it was really the standard to hold yourself to. And this also transferred when I started working in Denmark with Ole Krumlund Pedersen in 2000. I was fortunate enough to start there. And this was also the standard for Danes as well, and in Scandinavia, to really go outside of the Scandinavian language publications and to get it published in English in IJNA was really seen as the epitome of getting your research out there. So definitely having a reach in publishing in English is really, for many scholars, I think, the ideal option to note that your work has arrived, in the sense that it will also be seen by the broadest range of researchers possible. And that really means a lot. So I just wanted to add that bit.
And I think our journal is quite unusual in that we publish first publications and first publications in English. So our authors are allowed to publish their work in their own language or in their home country, as well as in the IJNA in English. And I think that's a really important oddity that we've maintained. John?
Yeah, just to say that, I mean, this word international is a very, very bold claim, and it's a big responsibility as well as and a challenge for so many people. The fact that we do have nowadays so many more routes to accessibility, and that people from institutions and even not in institutions around the world get access to our publications, our articles, is really very, very exciting. It's great that we do the abstracts in various languages, so that just gives a little bit of access to people who maybe feel that they reading in English is a bit of an investment, so that helps them make the decision whether that's the case or not. And also really just to give credit to people for actually, it's all well and good if you're a native speaker of English. Your challenge is to get a publication that's good enough to get into IJNA, and that's a high enough bar already. But then to do that in another language is a really, really big challenge, and we really, on the one hand, need to sort of give credit to people who are actually going that extra mile to do it, and it is a big obligation. It's some of our former editors, Valerie, and I think Miranda hinting at it as well, the amount of work that goes into publishing a journal, editing a journal rather, it's quite easy to make a choice if you're not careful that, some articles are easier to edit than other. I'm not accusing any of my former esteemed colleagues of that, but rather to turn it around and give credit to the editors for making that extra effort to make sure that non-native speakers of English get their articles processed and published as well, and give the extra input that's required to make it all happen. And the journal is so much richer as a result of that, I think.
Yes, it is a challenge, and I'm aware as the outgoing editor that we are still not as international as we should be, and there's still work to do to encourage people from around the world to submit. Let's go to Dolores.
Thanks, Miranda. Just to reinforce what some of you were saying about the importance of appealing a broader audience, both in terms of the people who publish and the people who read. The IJNA, what John said about the abstracts in other languages is very good, is useful. You at least have an idea, if you're not an English speaker, about what the articles are about. And as a Spanish native speaker who is quite fluent in English, I can tell you how difficult it is for people to dare submitting an article to a high quality journal, not just peer reviewed, but highly rated, but in English, because it's not just the academic challenge, it's also the psychological challenge. When you receive messages saying, and it hasn't happened in the IJNA, but it has happened elsewhere, messages like, sorry, your English is not good enough, try asking a native speaker to help you. It's not easy, and sometimes it's costly. You can't just hire somebody to help you write in English. So you say, okay, I'll just publish in my own language, which is easier, and in a journal which is also highly rated. Because now there's a lot of competition, and in Spanish there are journals that are very well positioned internationally. So maybe I'll stop here until we reach the point of talking about the future. But I just wanted to add those comments. Thank you.
Now, I know you're right, and I've had many people talk to me about how difficult it is and I mean, I live in a country which is not English speaking, and I know still after 20 something years how difficult it is to write in that other language, although I speak quite fluently. It is really, really difficult. And, you know, I hope that all of the editors of the IJNA have taken the time to try and help people out where they can. I think there's space, though, to think of new ways of doing that, and maybe we will come on to that with future ideas. Paula.
I've got this problem. Miranda's always nagging me about getting more international reviewers. My problem is often accessing the books. But it's also, as others have said, more and more people are prepared to publish in English, even though it's not their native language. I did some statistics before this exercise, and I realized that the number of foreign language books we review is going down. Now, probably some of that is my fault, but some of it is because particularly the Scandinavian languages, more and more of them are publishing in English. I could see, going through the 50 years of the journal, I could see the same authors choosing to publish in English instead of their native language. But it is something I'm very conscious we've got to work at all the time, being international. So I look forward to cooperating with Athena on this. Thanks.
And perhaps there we should go to our hopes for the future of the journal and where we hope to take it next. Athena, you seem the obvious choice to answer this question.
I'll take this one. I think everything that we've touched upon today, but even also in the noontime discussion yesterday, are really relevant. And I see it being in three. For me, I see it being in three phases, where it's a focus on representation, a focus on topics, and a focus on the technical aspects. And especially with representation, that's a main priority, is are we really representing with our publications? Are we really reflecting the field as it's developing, especially in non-traditional ways in different parts of the globe? We're seeing different approaches with citizen science and avocational archaeologists, which has always been a part of IJNA, fortunately, but it's expanding beyond just, of course, the UK or Northern Europe. And also getting these voices out and published, and really encouraging authors to publish, again, maybe English not being their first language, but always opening that door and saying that we'll go the extra mile as editors, extra kilometer as editors as well, to help with the translation aspects, because some of these authors have incredibly important information that they really have worked hard on, and it needs to be published and hopefully reach the widest audience. And I see IJNA and the editor's job as being a way to assist them to get there. With the topical aspects, I really do see, as I think Chris Underwood mentioned yesterday, with the UN Decade of Ocean Science, this general movement in our field as well, to not only be represented as, or seen as marine scientists by the marine sciences generally, but we also have this wonderful opportunity as we straddle both worlds of the humanities as well, to get recognition on both sides and drive that forward. And also see other aspects like climate change be integrated more and more into our work. Ideally, I would like to see wonderful things like sustainable development goals being mentioned more and more in our work, and also perhaps as part of our keywords, and tick that box off so people are also aware that this has relevance just beyond our field. This has implications for the future as well, and where we're heading with addressing changes in climate and how that affects cultural heritage. And I think with the topical aspect or the technical aspects, we've already discussed, with Paula shared with us this wonderful change from going on to paper to online to digital, and to open access. And this is, again, made a huge difference, not just for us as readers who are going from the paper versions, but it also has opened it up for a huge amount of our readership that doesn't always have access to libraries. And this is something that I really realized during COVID, when students weren't able to get into libraries and being teaching. I was at the time teaching for a spell with students online in Egypt, and they simply didn't have access to any of the printed material. But of course, now it's easier to share with them the digital options. And this also respectful of copyright and sharing. There's also other options now available that are not necessarily open access, but are a way to share your work, respecting those copyrights and getting it out to students who otherwise, and students and scholars who otherwise wouldn't be able to access it in a library. And that's a huge part that loops back to our representation and making sure we're being seen and heard by a large group of people, but also they are being seen and heard within the field itself.
Thank you. Dolores, did you want to come in?
Thank you. Yes, just briefly, I fully agree with what Athena just said. I wanted to add some reflection on Latin America. Before this panel, I used the wonderful digital tool of doing a quick search, just typing keywords country by country, the 19 countries of Latin America. And I quickly noticed that about 75% of the articles published in IJNA about Latin America were written by non-Latin American authors.
Yeah.
In other words, a small percentage is written by local people. And that may have to do with language, probably, but the discipline is growing tremendously in this region. There's a UNESCO course taking place right now as we speak with about 80 participants from Latin America. And they're young graduate students, they're people about to finish their career, young professionals. So it would be really fantastic to try to broaden the scope in that sense, so that they write about their own countries and their own archaeology and their own heritage. Thank you.
Dolores, I think we're in absolute agreement, and I'm sure Athena is too. And anything that can be done to encourage those young scholars to submit will be definitely taken up. Thank you. And that's the same in other countries. It's not just South America. Yeah, David, did you want to come back in?
Yes, quickly. In the next few years, obviously with climate change with high priority, the whole question of sea level rise is something which we've published on in the past. I remember in the early 60s, before the journal was launched, working with Nick Fleming as an archaeologist in trying to understand sea level change, and Nick realizing the importance of archaeological evidence for studying early sea level changes. We had a job to get publication. A few years later, one had the Thames barrage, and one realized that people were suddenly realizing this was going to be a problem for the future. But certainly, this sort of thing in the current context is going to be an important part of our continuing work and continuing publication. Thank you.
John.
Just to add to the whole sort of coastal change and sea level issues that people are facing. Also, just thinking about this trend that I think Paula observed earlier about the movement away from publications, looking at new excavations and shipwrecks, and maybe more and more work being done on kind of ethnographic topics. So I think that's maybe a trend. It's, certainly something I've been involved in. So I've got to, declare an interest in that. But what's happening, I think there, and this again goes back to what Dolores was saying about kind of insider outsider representations of local activities of one kind or another. is that there's a lot of change going on in local people's practices and in what we as maritime archaeologists might identify as kind of traditional. So looking at wooden boats with sails and things like that, and regarding them as being kind of worth investigating because of their kind of historic implications, etc. There's a huge amount of change going on, a lot of it to do with climate change, a lot of it to do with overfishing, a lot of it to do with coastal development, which means that, you know, sort of communities that have pursued more or less traditional activities are in many cases changing those activities, moving away from those activities and moving away from the kind of technologies that underpin them. And there's a huge task to be done out there, really, in terms of engaging with that and thinking about it, both in terms of recording and preserving in a documentary form, but also thinking about the processes of what it means to live by the sea during a period of you know, climate change and overfishing and strain on resources of one kind or another.
I think we're certainly in a time of change. And the next 50 years are going to be exciting for the journal, without a doubt. I've been thinking about today and the conference we've all been at, which has been held completely digitally. And so I think we've had people presenting from all over the world, from many different places. And I'd like to think that we can continue that post-COVID somehow, that we can not lose the things that COVID's forced us to take up. In fact, we'd started our IJNA webinar series before COVID kicked in, but I know lots of other people have joined in and put their stuff online. So I think we have to keep reflecting on how to maintain access for people around the world, people who don't have library access. And this sort of conference, although we're all desperate to see each other, and publishing the hard copies is still going to happen, I think we have to keep reflecting on how to make it as open and as accessible as possible. I could go on at length about the problems with the current open access formula, but probably this isn't the place. We have one more clip from Valerie that I think we should just go to. Mark.
We do, don't worry, I'm still here. Just let me find it. It's a very brief final farewell.
Yes, I'm still a reader. I have to say I'm bogged down. I've gone back to land archaeology. Well, I've gone back to prehistory, which is where I started. And I'm very interested in Maltese Neolithic and in sewn boats. I mean, you know, it's all maritime related. And I'm working on a big article at the moment. So that's keeping me quiet in lockdown. Before you switch off, can I show you? I do have a mint copy of volume 1. Yes, can you see that?
I can. It's much better than the copy we've got.
Yes, I picked it. My own copy is very battered, but I picked this up in a second-hand bookshop. And so would you like it for your records and keep it in a wrapper or something?
That would be amazing. We'll put it somewhere very safe so that it doesn't doesn't get fingered and thumbed by people, because yeah, our first edition is by no means mint.
No, I couldn't even show you mine. I think the cover's pretty well coming off. Yes.
Okay, Valerie, that's wonderful. Thank you so much. There you go.
Thank you. I think there's a couple of questions and we probably just have a couple of minutes. So if anyone else has a question they want to type in quickly, then please do. Otherwise, Leon Smith asks about the move from having the news in the journal to the NAS weekly email. And is there any sadness that we now focus more exclusively on the academic material? Well, I think in the beginning, it served its purpose to have the news in the journal, but I think there are just better ways to get the news out more quickly to the people that need it than the journal, and it allows us the space to concentrate on the peer-reviewed material and the reviews and the notes. So no, I'm not particularly sad that we've lost that, although I do agree. He goes on to ask about the archive for the online newsletter, and I agree someone should be looking at that.
Can I just add that I agree with what you said. I used to have the odd argument with Angela about this because she very much regretted the loss of the news. But as soon as the journal went twice a year, not 4 times, it was not news anymore. And there was the problem of being fair and wide enough in the coverage, which was hard work, clearly, for Angela, and I wasn't prepared to do it. And I think the NAS newsletters be much better for that purpose.
David.
A quick thought. I wonder how many papers there are in this weekend's conference that one could encourage publication in the journal, looking at the new editor. There is one problem though. If you invite somebody to contribute, you've then got to stress this is a peer-reviewed journal and an invitation is not automatically accepted. This is something that's in the back of our mind as we go on. But I could think this weekend, I'd love to see something from our Russian friends to make sure we remain international about the British ship they acquired and sent to the Aegean, fighting the Turks in the famous Battle of 1770, and the ship was sunk. But again, this sort of international side is the sort of paper that we should be looking at. I have no idea whether they've been thought of it, but something for the new.
Well, Russian maritime archaeology has been a problem for us because historically, Russians publish in German. So trying to...
The new generation doesn't always know. No, that's partly right.
But there's work to do there as well.
Yes, sure.
Everywhere we look, there's work to do to expand both readership and submissions. But, you know, Athena's going to be busy.
I hope Athena's going to be very busy, as you have been, Miranda. And this is a good time perhaps to say thank you, Miranda, for all your work as editor.
Well, thank you. And it's been an absolute delight. Perhaps, Athena, I'll leave you the last word as you're taking over, if you want one.
Sure. The only thing I'll say is I'm really honored to follow in the footsteps of such an honored and long tradition of, there's not many journals in our field, and we know what it takes to publish. We all do. And I'm going to ignore Valerie's words and about hating the position, because I think I've only ever enjoyed editing, and I hope that I can also continue and have in everyone's or her words academic niceties. I can continue with that, because it's always been, as a reader and as a published author in IJNA as well, it's only ever been a positive experience. So I hope it will continue to be so for years to come, and we continue to move forward and build a course upon the shoulders of those who came before us and those who are here today, because it's so wonderful to hear how something this important in our field really came into being, and the effort that people put in to make it happen is really important to acknowledge. And I appreciate that people have done that and are here today to share that with us. So thank you.
Thank you, and thank you everybody for contributing to this discussion.